Sonic
Yes.
was never good. If you disagree, you can call the cops.
Also, the reason is they all want to have sex with Big the Cat.
What?
They all want to have sex with Big
Gonna
the
see
Cat.
what's
Oh,
my
hell
kiss.
no! Oh, hell no! Whoa!
Sonic the Hedgehog as a series has garnered a lot of hate throughout the decades, but was it really that bad? Throughout most of my life, I've been a pretty big Sonic fan. Ever since 4 or 5, I'd say I've been to a series like a lot. Now, I want to make this clear, because I think this is like a very important part, is that I could never play these games myself. I never really had a console, and I never knew how to pirate games until I was like 11 or something. And on top of that, my PC wasn't exactly the greatest. So, most of my opinions came from YouTubers, in which they would tell me that Sonic sucked, or Sonic was bad, and, you know, Sonic had a rough transition to 3D. And as a kid, I didn't really question this because, I was so fucking being pranked. But now that I've matured, I can start to see that a lot of what people were saying about Sonic was pretty dumb. And while disliking Sonic was never a bad thing, I mean, we all have our own opinions at the end of the day. Mine are better than yours. But still, the hate that Sonic would get would be outright just unfair. To a point that if another game series got the same hate Sonic did, I think a lot of people would realize, wow, this is like really fucking weird. Because imagine if you had a top 10 worst Mario's friends list, where the writer writes about killing them in a very gruesome detail. Yeah. That would be pretty fucking weird. But where did all the Sonic hate start? And was Sonic games really ever that bad to begin with? So, first of all, I think we need to go back to the beginning. In 1991, Sonic released for the Sega Genesis, and it was pretty big. At the time, Sega and Nintendo were in their crazy rivalry before Nintendo just bought out Sega. And at the time, people thought Sega was winning. Sonic was a pioneer in speed platforming. It was the first of its kind and it did extremely well. It garnered multiple sequels, all of which being critically acclaimed, and the Sonic game spin-offs / the Sonic ports that we would get for the Game Gear also were extremely successful as well. Basically, in the late 90s, it was basically Sonic Central. Now, of course, Sonic didn't have bangers all the time, but it was super consistent to see Sonic and go, yeah, that shit's gonna be gas. But then something big happened. 3D came into video games, with some of the first ever 3D games being revolutionary to this day. Sega saw this and was like, yo, we got a cookie. So eventually they came up with their own 3D games. Now, for the longest time, a lot of people have had this put in their head, is that Sonic had a pretty rough transition to 3D. Now again, as a kid, I was sticking crayons up my nose, so I didn't really know if this was true or not, but I never asked because, like, I was stupid. However, now being a lot more older, again, I realized how stupid this statement was. For example, let's look at Sonic's first ever 3D appearance, which is Sonic the Fighters. I know, a ton of people are surprised because they think it's like Sonic Adventure, but no, it is actually Sonic the Fighters, and then Sonic 3D Blast, and then Sonic Adventure. Sonic the Fighters, while not a masterpiece, was definitely still solidly received by critics. Having mixed reviews like the game wasn't super complex in terms of fighting, but the cartoony animations and overall aesthetic made it really fun to look at. And people still have this opinion to this day, some people even thinking that this is the best look for Sonic in general. And while I won't say that this is true, I will say that this is still probably my top 3 looks for Sonic. It's just so fun and so like vibrant and beautiful. I just love it. And I think that the Sonic franchise has lost some of this, but that's a video for another day. Point is that the game was still taken pretty well. And then we got into Sonic 3D Blast. Now, while the game has definitely aged, this game back in the day was taken super well. I'm talking people were saying this was the best Sonic game out at the time, praising it for its graphics, which and the gameplay was revolutionary for the time. Basically, it said, Sega, you cooked, bruh. And Sega wasn't done. They made Sonic Adventure and Adventure 2 back to back, both games being considered to be some of the best video games of all time. So the whole Sonic had a rough transition to 3D could not have been more wrong, but even despite the 3D games still popping off, the 2D games were still holding their own. Even though they had Sonic Blast, which was pretty fucking bad, considering it to be one of the worst Sonic games of all time, Sonic the Hedgehog Pocket Adventure would come out, a Sonic port of Sonic 2 to the Neo Geo. IGN loves this game. Like, I mean, they ride that shit's dick like daily. Then we get into the Advanced series that released the same year that Sonic Adventure 2 did, which the games are considered to be really good as well. So again, Sonic was doing even better than before. So the question is, Where did the fall off happen? Well, after Sonic and Sonic Adventure 2, Sega decided to try some new aspects of the games and maybe flesh out the story a little bit for Sonic, creating both Heroes and Shadow the Hedgehog. While Heroes still kept more of the Sonic vibe, yet had different gameplay, Shadow the Hedgehog changed in both gameplay and story, with Shadow having a little bit more of a serious story in comparison to its earlier counterparts. These games were mixed, to say the least. Now, some of these reviews were definitely stupid.
You are done.
For example, GameSpot said nobody cares about these peripheral characters. People play Sonic the Hedgehog games to play Sonic the Hedgehog. Now that is fair, you do play Sonic games to play as Sonic the Hedgehog, at least for some people. I know some Big the Cat fans are waiting for their Big the Cat fishing spin-off, but in reality, people can just be fans of multiple characters in the franchise. Like, you're not going to go into a franchise and be like, hey man, I really want to play this game just for this character alone, and if I have any other character other than this character, I'm not playing it. That's pretty stupid. It's not like you're locked away from playing as Sonic. You can play as Sonic throughout most of the game. If anything, it seems like a pretty shitty excuse. And a lot of these other takes just feel so skill issue-ish. Like, a lot of times people are saying, oh, they die all the time, getting stuck on the 4th level. It felt more so that they weren't making good points, but just that they sucked at video games. This is something that is still happening to this day when it comes to Sonic and reviews. Now, to be fair, some complaints were pretty justified, like the controls can be pretty iffy at times, some of the level design can be a bit confusing, and the voice work definitely wasn't great at times. However, I do think Shadow the Hedgehog and Sonic Heroes were a bit misjudged at the time, for sure. Shadow the Hedgehog was also mixed, but still solidly praised. It even got Best Platformer in 2005 by Nintendo Power Readers, which actually outdid Sonic Rush, which came out I think around the time as well, and also sold a pretty good amount. However, people would make fun of Shadow the Hedgehog for its sense of maturity, saying that the new adult interpretation of Sonic was painfully dumb, and that the darker edge was not really meant for Sonic fans. Now, while the game did have some darker moments, by no means was this something new. I mean, dog, in Sonic Adventure 2, we saw Gerald Robotnik be executed. Like, my brother, we were already in darker times. However, even despite this, some people actually did give it a chance and said that it wasn't bad for the most part. Some people were just straight up being racist and saying that Shadow the Hedgehog isn't as half as urban or quite as gangsta, which is just racist.
Disgusting black creature.
But at the end of the day, Shadow the Hedgehog did succeed as a market success. Around the same time, the Advanced Trilogy had just wrapped up and Sonic Rush was being a wild success. So again, at this point in time, while Sonic definitely wasn't as great as it used to be, it still was doing incredibly well. However, as they say, good things never last. In Sega headquarters, Sega was like, yo, we gotta change this shit up. So they made their most ambitious project yet, Sonic the Hedgehog, or as people say, Sonic 06. And Sonic 06 is going to be this brand new thing, being an entire reboot of the franchise, changing the atmosphere from cartoony visuals to more realistic tones, and even changing designs like Eggman and even Sonic, with some saying that this is the best that Sonic has ever looked. And while I definitely don't agree, I do say that this model can look pretty cool. So they got to work creating a new physics engine, giving Sonic and the cast new abilities, making all the cast playable, making the level design different, basically making it fresh and unique, while also tying back to things such as the Genesis era. There would be pre-release showings for the game and people would actually fuck with the game. They thought the game looked pretty good and that the gameplay felt nice. But then, things happened. Yuji Naka, the series co-creator and team lead, just like, you know what, I don't want to play with you anymore, and then left, so he could form his own company, Probe, creating such riveting games as Let's Catch and Fishing Resort. Sonic 06 suffered for this, by the way. So of course, things were getting really bad, but it got even worse. So then Sega got the Wii development kits from Nintendo as the Wii coming out the same year. So Sega, instead of saying, it seems that we have an issue on our hands as our main leader left just midway through the project, and we just got the Wii development kits, meaning that we'd have to make a completely separate port which would take us a long time. So instead of delaying the game and saying, hey guys, sorry for a long wait, we promise that we'll be getting this game out as quickly as possible, and making the fans even more happy with things like DLC, Sega decided to split the team in half, with one team to finish Sonic the Hedgehog for the 360 and PlayStation 3, and the other team working on Sonic and the Secret Rings for the Wii. Now, I don't need to spell it out for you on how horrible this idea is, but it gets even worse as Sega wanted to push this for the 2006 holiday shopping season. So not only did the team shrink, but we were a rushed shrink team. So as you can guess, all these factors combining it together, plus the fact that this game is supposed to be one of the most ambitious games in Sonic's history, yeah, the game fucking sucked. The game was absolute dog shit, being seen as one of the worst games of all time. It was so bad that people just thought Sonic was just giving up as a whole. And while this definitely was a super huge hit to Sonic's reputation, this really wouldn't hit until the 2010s. Now before this, however, we had Sonic and the Six Rings, Sonic and the Black Knight, and Sonic Unleashed. Storybook games were considered mediocre for the most part. Similar to Sonic Heroes and Shadow the Hedgehog, these games were meh, not amazing, but definitely not bad either. Even saying that it was a general improvement over recent Sonic games. And then Sonic Unleashed came out. Unleashed was actually considered to be pretty good, with many fans liking the daytime stages, however not being a fan of the Werehog stages. Which is understandable as most of the Werehog stages are pretty flawed. But then came in the 2010s.
It's every day, bro, with the Disney Channel.
Now YouTube had still been existing at this point, but YouTube had partnered with Google, making them a lot more mainstream. And as such, a lot more Let's Plays and reviews of games became a lot more main spread. And you better guess that Sonic was right there for the taking. Now at this point in time, Sonic was trying to get back up from a really bad slump, and it was slowly doing so. With Unleashed being a general improvement over the Wii games, it seemed like if, say for example, YouTube had just been slightly delayed, Sonic could have gotten back up and actually had a lot better of a presence. However, they saw that Sonic was down trying to get up and beat the shit out of him and put him on fire. The reviews were relentless for Sonic. Now while most of these Sonic 06 reviews were pretty justifiable as the game was pretty bad, and there was nothing wrong with you saying your opinion on the game as a whole, Unleashed, Secret Rings, and Black Knight were all dragged through the dirt, calling out things that didn't even really make sense to review, seeming like they nitpicked the smallest things in order to make the game seem a lot worse.
Now, if I wanted to hack and slash my way through tons of enemies, I would have played a fighting game. Because in the next level, you get to fly around in the sky trying to shoot down airplanes. So, what does this even have to do with Sonic the Hedgehog? And why on earth does it take so long for the boss's health meter to go down? This isn't even fair, since a single shot can knock my sorry ass all the way back to Green Hill Zone.
And then they were going to target the games that were actually pretty good and pretty well received by fans. As many of these games for pretty nitpicky reasons. Things that if you said about for things like Mario, people would clown on you for, but for Sonic it was ha 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 hilarious.
You wait for the boss to faff around, dodging its attacks. Then, as in the case of Dr. Eggman here, they literally just decide to let you hit them. Repeat that a few times and it's over. There's no tension, no careful cat and mouse game.
Zipping along fast. This is way more exciting than Mario, but then you hit a bad guy. The game actively tries to keep you from moving quickly by punishing you for doing so.
So when you play the game, the first thing you'll notice is that the graphics are okay-ish for a Game Boy Advance game now. The game was catered for little kids who are basically brain-dead monkeys or who have autism, because this game was designed so all you gotta do is hold left to win.
The ridicule was so bad that Sega themselves decided to make fun of themselves, making memes and posts about themselves to coin in on the laughter. And while sure, these were kind of funny at the time, imagine a hardcore Sonic fan watching their franchise basically die by laughing at themselves. At this point in time, Sonic was in the worst spot that's ever been, with many lies being stated as well. And this is something I really want to coin back in on, but I didn't really have a good transition. And that is, a lot of statements that I learned growing up weren't really correct. A lot of Sonic games were really good, and there was actually a lot less bad than good. A lot of people would lie and say that, oh, Sonic had a rough transition to 3D, or Sonic was never good.
Sonic was never good. If you disagree, you can call the cops.
Also, the reason is they all want to have sex with Big the Cat. What? They all want to have sex with Big the Cat. Oh, hell no! Oh, hell no! Whoa!
However, these claims were wrong, as Sonic actually had a pretty great transition to 3D objectively, and Sonic had generally more well-received games than bad. And eventually, Sonic would go into a self-deprecating aspect and play games extremely safely. A good example is his Sonic Colors, one of the safest games in its entirety. And it's a pretty solid game all around, it's actually not that bad, but it's just so light bread. Like, I hop in, I play the game, I'm like, yeah, that was cool, and I forget about it. There are some cool aspects for sure, like the Wisps I think are cool aspects, adding more variety for platforming. I think some of the environments are cool, but Sonic at this point in time was just too jokey, never really took itself too seriously, and was overall just a former shell of itself. Generations would eventually come after, and Generations started a very big trend of using nostalgia, having older stages from older games. And while at the time it made sense, because this was the 20th anniversary game, and these levels by no means were bad, they were actually very good, and a lot of people consider this to be one of the best games of all time. In fact, for the longest time, I thought this was just the best Sonic game outright. but it would continue to create a trend of Sega just playing it safe and not really trying to do anything special anymore. A game series that started off by breaking the mold and changing the formula as we know it, now was left. It even tried being Mario with Sonic the Lost World. Now, I actually think Sonic the Lost World is an interesting game that has some really interesting mechanics, like wall running, or just general parkour mechanics that could be really cool. However, the game clearly tried to mimic Mario Galaxy like a ton, and I can't believe I forgot this. Sonic 4. Sonic 4's main marketing campaign was making fun of itself by pretending that, oh guys, guess who Sonic's gonna be with in Sonic 4 Episode 1? Only for him to be with nobody and to just be a single player game. Also, at the time, a lot of people were hating on Sonic's friends for seemingly no reason.
There are also challenge missions for each world that mix up the gameplay. Most are cool, but a few of them, usually the ones starring Sonic's dumb friends, are annoying.
Like, for example, I seen people were hitting on Luigi, Daisy, Peach, it wouldn't really slide. Or what about Yoshi? That wouldn't slide either. But again, Mario had a pretty clean track record. Sonic, however, even though overall had a very good track record, having rarely any straight up bad games, at that point in time, that Sonic was just the funny thing to laugh at. I said this like a billion times, I know. We then got into Sonic Boom. Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric was actually supposed to be on the PC and other consoles. However, due to Nintendo cucking Sega again, they had to put it on the Wii U. And due to the Wii U specs not being able to run the engine that Sonic Boom was on, they had to completely downsize and everything, and it still had some major problems and glitches. And on top of that, the story was even worse because they were taking aspects from the Boom TV show. And while the Boom TV show was by no means bad,
this wall tastes like dirt!
Can't do it. I can't take this shit no more, man.
As a game story, though, it's not very great. Eventually, they came out with Sonic Boom Shattered Crystal, and that also sucked. And then Fire and Ice, which is actually pretty good, but nobody really cared because it was probably too late at that point. As a Sonic fan, it really hurt. Having the game series that you love being hated by millions of people and seeming like the cool thing to do, it hurt. But eventually, the light shined through. Eventually got things like Sonic Mania. It called back to the classic games as, well, people love nostalgia. However, even though they used this whole aspect of nostalgia, it still made itself original, having newer levels and newer aspects of the game incorporated with older aspects of the games. Being a pretty big love letter to the fans of Sonic, and it felt like a genuine Sonic game for once. We were finally able to say, yeah, this is my shit right here. I couldn't really find any way to hate on it because it was just a genuinely very good game. For the longest time, Sonic was playing it extremely safe and had some pretty weak games. And for generations, a game that was considered to be pretty good was still getting really ridiculous hate on it. But to finally get a game that nobody could really hate on, just everybody, or at least most people to admit, yo, it's just kinda gas. Now, of course, you got Sonic Forces and... So to equate Sonic Mania, I'd say it was more like a flashlight. While Frontiers in the movie were the bulb. The movie design was absolute dog shit until Tyson decided, no, we're not doing this. Sonic can suffer for too long. Let me cook. The movie was a huge success, being considered to be one of the first ever good video game movies. But for the longest time, video game movies were not good until Sonic came out. Which is super ironic considering the fact that Sonic, one of the worst game IPs at the time, saved the video game movie franchise. And it didn't stop there, as Sonic Movie 2 would come out, and then Movie 3, it was said that Sonic movies were here to stay. Meanwhile, Frontiers would do incredibly well in not only America, but in Japan as well. Part of the world that Sega could never really crack as to why they didn't really like Sonic. But they loved Frontiers, like they ate that shit up. Frontiers was great, being a game that finally took itself seriously in both story and gameplay wise. It tried new things and succeeded pretty well. Now, of course, is Frontiers great? No. And it has its issues for sure, but it was a step in the right direction. A step in the right direction that Shadow Generations eventually took and ran with. The game was a critical success, blowing up literally everywhere. It had gone to a point that the people that were hating on Sonic were now gassing it up, being like, yo, Sonic was this guy? Sonic was always good, right guys?
Hep hep! Hep hep!
Boo! You stink!
Yeah. You're not invited to Sonic Cookout, man. Sonic Frontiers and Shadow Generations took itself seriously, creating really deep and strong stories while also having really fun and enjoyable gameplay. Shadow Generations fleshing out the open zone that Sonic Frontiers had, along with fleshing out the cyberspace levels. There's finally a time where Sega had seen their problems and wanted to make things better, creating a game that not only can Sonic and non-Sonic fans enjoy, but a game that finally didn't hate on itself for being Sonic. It was even more pushed in the movies, where the movies were also taking itself seriously. Being stories not only can new younger fans of the series enjoy, but also older fans seeing references and enjoying the aspects of the movies. Sonic was finally back on its feet. as a franchise doing insanely well and even being able to collab with DC. That's huge! It is a great time to be a Sonic fan. And I know that we have our disagreements on what Sonic should look like or what Sonic teeth should be like, but be happy that Sonic is finally doing well. Now, of course, this doesn't exempt Sonic from criticism, and we should still be criticizing Sega as hard as we can. Because remember, Sonic still needs to improve. I love Frontiers and I love Shadow Generations, but I know that Sonic can do better. So Sega does need to lock in. Now, we can finally breathe a sigh of relief and see, finally, that the internet and Sega is both taking Sonic seriously, and Sonic from now on will be a much better franchise than it was a decade ago. This has been Fade, fading out.